Cancer loves acid. In this video, we'll explore 9 acid-forming foods we should try to avoid in order to provide a healthy environment for our body to naturally protect against cancer and other diseases. If you found this video helpful, please like, share, and subscribe. Your support allows me to continue helping others. Thank you. My trusted friends, Dr. Owen and Dr. Linda, are joining me in today's presentation to add depth and insight to the discussion. I hope you will enjoy it.
All right, ready to dive deep? Today we're looking at something that might change how you see your dinner plate.
Oh, really? What's that?
Acid-forming foods.
Interesting.
We're going to be breaking down this video by Dr. Barbara-Oneill, a health educator.
Okay.
She points out 9 foods that could be making your body too acidic.
It's amazing, isn't it, how much we talk about healthy eating?
Yeah.
But we don't always think about how food affects our pH balance.
That's so true. And Dr. Oneill makes a pretty strong connection between this imbalance and the chance of getting certain diseases.
Right. She even says that at a cellular pH of 5.5,
Yeah.
things like yeast, fungi, and even cancer can start to really thrive. And she also points out that cancer cells, they seem to love an environment that's low in oxygen and high in sugar.
Yeah, paints a scary picture, doesn't it?
It does.
So let's start with the basics. What exactly is pH balance, and why should we care so much?
Well, think of pH as a scale, and this scale measures how acidic or alkaline something is. Our bodies, they need to stay within a pretty specific range on that scale to work the way they should.
Right.
And if things get too acidic, well, it can really mess with a lot of different processes.
So it's not just about like heartburn or an upset stomach after a big meal.
No, not at all. It's about what kind of environment we're creating inside our bodies. One that supports health or maybe, makes things a little bit harder.
Makes sense. So where do these acid-forming foods come in?
Well, Dr. Oneill starts with meat, especially red meat and processed meats, the kind we see a lot in Western diets.
Yeah, I'm guessing that's not a big surprise to a lot of people. We hear a lot about the link between those kinds of meat and health problems.
Exactly. And Dr. Oneill actually mentions this really interesting research by Dr. Colin Campbell.
Oh, yeah.
Where he was able to actually, turn cancer cells on and off in rats.
What? How do you do that?
Just by changing how much meat and dairy they ate.
Wow, that's incredible. So meat's on the list. What's next? I have a feeling this one might be a little surprising.
It might be. It's hybridized wheat.
Wheat? You mean like bread?
I know, right?
What makes that so acidic?
Well, Dr. Oneill explains that wheat has changed a lot over time.
Oh, okay.
You see, the original wheat, it was called einkorn. It had this really delicate gluten structure, easy to digest. But over, centuries, we've been hybridizing wheat to make more of it.
Right.
But that's led to this much more complex gluten structure, and it's not as easy on our systems.
So we've kind of messed with wheat so much that our bodies are having a harder time breaking it down.
Basically, yeah. And that could be a big reason why we're seeing so many people having problems with gluten these days.
So let me give you the wheat story. The original wheat that God made is called Enkenhorn, or some call it just Enkhorn. And that original wheat had a very fragile protein or gluten structure. It is not sure when, but they estimate a couple of 1,000 years ago, Enkenhorn did a wild hybrid with a field grass and came up with the Emma strain of wheat. Its structure, its protein or gluten structure is not as fragile, but it's still fairly fragile. And in the 1950s, it was the Emma strain of wheat that was put through intensive crossbreeding, and it came up with the hybridized wheat that we know today. That hybridization of the wheat created an incredibly complex gluten or protein structure. Yesterday we looked at the starch that was changed, but today we're looking at how the hybridization process changed the gluten or the protein structure, and it's almost only a cast iron gut that can break down that very complex protein or gluten structure. That explains why so many people are gluten intolerant today. You look at the timeline. So It was the 1950s that the wheat was hybridized. It was the 1970s that it went worldwide. So by the 1990s, every pasta, every pizza, every biscuit, cake, cookie, donut, cereal, bread, it's all made out of the hybridized wheat. You see, the farmers love it, and I don't blame them for loving it because they get 6 times more grain per acre. Who wouldn't like that? They've got to pay their bills.
So meat and bread.
2 of the staples.
What else is on this acidic list?
Well, this one might hit a little close to home for some people. Caffeine.
You mean like coffee and tea? I mean, those aren't foods, really.
True, but they still affect our internal environment, right?
Right.
Think about it. If you're eating and drinking a lot of acidic things, your body has to work extra hard just to keep that pH balance in check.
I see. It's not about avoiding these things entirely,
Right.
but being aware of like the overall effect of what we choose to consume.
Yeah. And caffeine specifically, it can deplete some important minerals. Sodium, potassium, magnesium, calcium.
Oh, right.
All those are really important for keeping things balanced.
Okay, so caffeine's on the watch list.
Yeah.
What about sugar? That's got to be up there in terms of acidity, right?
Sugar's a big one for sure. Refined sugar specifically. And it's kind of sneaky.
What do you mean?
Well, because sugar itself isn't actually acidic.
Really? So then what's the issue?
It's what happens when your body processes it. All those metabolic byproducts, a lot of them are acidic.
Ah, so it's like a hidden acid bomb going off in our system.
Exactly. And if you remember what we were saying earlier, Dr. Oneill mentioned how cancer loves a sugary environment.
Right, right. It's all connected. And inflammation, too, which sugar can definitely contribute to.
Right.
That tends to do well in a more acidic environment, right?
Exactly.
Okay, starting to see the bigger picture here. What else is on this list? I'm almost afraid to ask.
This one might be a bit of a surprise. Aged cheese.
Aged cheese. Really? I thought cheese was supposed to be good for you.
Well, like a lot of things, it depends on the details. We're talking about those aged cheeses, like blue cheese.
Okay, yeah.
You know, the ones that are basically full of mold.
Right, yeah, that makes sense. Mold probably doesn't help with pH balance.
Probably not the best.
Yeah.
But it's not just the mold. Dairy products in general tend to be high in protein and phosphorus.
Okay.
And those things contribute to something called potential renal acid load, or PRAL for short.
Okay, you have to break that one down for me. PRAL.
What in the world is that?
Think of it as like a measure of how much acid a certain food creates after you digest it.
Okay.
Your body then has to neutralize that acid or get rid of it somehow. Oh, so even though cheese might not taste acidic, it can still create that acidic environment inside.
That's it. And this goes for other dairy products too, like milk and yogurt.
This is all so fascinating. A lot to take in, though. So far, we've got meat, bread, caffeine, sugar, cheese. What else did Dr. Oneill mention?
Well, there's also alcohol and tobacco.
Right, but those aren't really foods, are they?
True. They're not foods, but they still make the body more acidic. Actually, when alcohol breaks down, it turns into acetaldehyde.
Okay.
Which is actually, like, toxic to brain cells.
Yeah, that's a pretty good reason to limit those.
Yeah.
So we've got meat, bread, caffeine, sugar, cheese, alcohol, and tobacco. Feels like everything good is on this list.
I hear you, but don't worry, you don't have to give up everything you enjoy.
So there's hope.
There is. Dr. Oneill suggests aiming for an 80-20 balance.
The 80-20 rule. Right?
Exactly.
You've mentioned that a few times. So what exactly does that mean?
You need to be consuming 20% acid-forming foods and 80%, 70 to 80% alkaline-forming foods. And I'm sure you're not surprised to hear me say that the 20% should come from this section here.
80% of what?
It means 80% of your diet should be made up of alkaline-forming foods, and only 20% from these acid-forming ones.
Okay, that sounds much more doable than having to say goodbye to all the fun stuff. But how do I even know which foods are alkaline-forming? Is there some kind of secret code for figuring that out?
There are charts and things you can look at.
Ready to talk more about these acid-forming foods?
Yeah, ready when you are.
That definitely makes me feel better. Now, before we move on to those last 2 acid-forming things on Dr. Oneill's list, I'm curious, why does this all even matter? I mean, besides the potential link to serious conditions like cancer, what happens when our body is too acidic?
That's a great question, and it gets to the heart of why we're doing this deep dive. When your body is too acidic, it can lead to all sorts of problems. digestive issues, inflammation, fatigue,
Wow.
even joint pain.
So it's not just about preventing big diseases, it's about feeling better every day.
Exactly. By moving towards a more alkaline-forming diet, you're basically creating an environment inside your body that supports your overall health.
I love that. It's like we're taking control of our health, one meal at a time. Now, you said there were two final culprits on Dr. O'Neill's list. What are they?
The last two are more categories of food than specific things: grains and nuts.
Wait a minute. I thought we just talked about quinoa, millet, and amaranth being alkaline-forming grains.
You did.
And that almonds and Brazil nuts were exceptions for nuts.
Right, and that's why this is so important. It's not about avoiding entire food groups. It's about realizing that there are variations within those groups.
Okay, I see. So while there are a few alkaline-forming stars in the grain and nut world, the majority are actually acidic.
That's it. Dr. O'Neill points out that all grains, except for those few exceptions, are generally acidifying.
So even those whole grains that everyone says are so good for you,
Yeah,
the ones full of fiber and nutrients,
that's right.